I left my boyfriend because I still love my ex. Instead of understanding me, he canceled the cards he gave me and stopped paying my bills. I've always believed that a woman of a certain pedigree doesn't just live life, she curates it like a high-end gallery. For 3 years, Julian was the perfect frame for the masterpiece that is my existence, providing the kind of lifestyle that most people only see on curated Instagram feeds. We lived in a penthouse that overlooked the city, a place where the floor-to-ceiling windows were cleaned weekly and the air always smelled like expensive sandalwood candles. I maintained my side of the bargain by being the ultimate accessory, attending every dull corporate gala and smiling at his drab business associates. It was a fair trade of my aesthetic value for his financial stability, or so I thought. However, even the most beautiful frame can start to feel like a cage when your heart is elsewhere. That elsewhere was Silas, a man who possesses the tortured soul of a Renaissance painter and the cheekbones to match. Silas and I had a history that predated Julian's bank account, a raw and primal connection that didn't need 5-star reservations to feel real. He's an artist in the purest sense, which is a polite way of saying he hasn't quite figured out how to monetize his vision yet. Every time I looked at Silas, I felt like I was back in my true element, away from the sterile, calculated world of Julian's portfolios. I convinced myself that I was being brave by choosing passion over cold, hard cash, which is a sacrifice very few women in my circle would ever dream of making. It felt like a spiritual awakening, a return to my authentic self. The problem, of course, was telling Julian, a man who views everything through the lens of a balance sheet. I sat him down in our minimalist living room, draped in silk that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and explained that I was leaving. I was very gentle about it, emphasizing that our connection had simply reached its natural expiration date. I told him that I needed to follow the magnetic pull of my soul back to Silas, who was waiting for me in a much smaller, though significantly more authentic apartment. I expected him to be devastated, naturally, but also to maintain the decorum that comes with his tax bracket. A man of his stature should know how to handle a transition with grace and maturity. During the conversation, I made sure to mention the logistical side of things, because being spiritual doesn't mean being delusional about expenses. I explained to Julian that since I had invested 3 of my prime years into his social standing, it was only right that he provide a severance package of sorts. I suggested a transition period where he would keep my allowance active and continue covering my bills until Silas and I found our rhythm. I mean, I had literally elevated his brand just by standing next to him at the country club for 36 months. That kind of brand management isn't free, and I assumed he understood the value I'd brought to his mediocre social life. He didn't say a word, just stared at me with those cold, calculating eyes. I took his silence as the silent consent of a man who knew he was losing a prize and wanted to save face. After packing my essentials, leaving behind the seasonal pieces that were so last year, I moved in with Silas to begin our new, enlightened life. To celebrate our reunion and show Silas the kind of world we would soon be dominating together, I decided to take him to L'Hermitage. It's the kind of place where the waiters know your name and the wine list is longer than most novels. I wanted Silas to see that even though I was choosing him, I wasn't choosing a life of mediocrity or budgeting. We deserved to toast to our future with the finest vintage available. The evening started out perfectly, exactly as I had envisioned in my mind. We were seated at one of the best tables, and I could feel the envious stares of the other patrons as I laughed at one of Silas's poetic observations. I ordered the $400 tasting menu without a second thought, along with a bottle of reserve wine that cost more than Silas's current rent. It was an exercise in luxury, a statement that my status was inherent and not merely a byproduct of Julian's presence. Silas looked a bit overwhelmed, but I just patted his hand and told him to get used to the finer things. I was in my element, basking in the familiar glow of high-end service and exquisite cuisine. When the bill finally arrived, tucked discreetly into a leather folder, I didn't even glance at the total. I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out the platinum card Julian had given me for emergencies and maintenance. I handed it to the waiter with the practiced ease of a woman who has never had a payment rejected in her life. It was a moment of supreme confidence, a final bridge between my past and my future. I sat back, sipping the last of my wine, and started describing the vacation Silas and I should take to the Amalfi Coast. I was already mentally packing my resort wear when the waiter returned. The atmosphere shifted instantly when I saw the look on the waiter's face, a mixture of pity and professional embarrassment. He leaned in and whispered that the card had been declined, and not just declined but reported as stolen. I felt a hot flush of rage creep up my neck, not out of shame but out of pure indignation at Julian's pettiness. I tried to explain that there must be a mistake, that the card belonged to my estate, but the waiter was firm. The silence at our table was deafening, especially as I noticed the whispers from the table next to us. It was the Millers, a couple from the country club who had always been jealous of my wardrobe. Silas, bless his heart, looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and die. He started fumbling with his wallet, pulling out 3 different debit cards that looked like they had been through a laundry cycle. It was the most humiliating spectacle I have ever had to endure in my entire life. He had to split the bill across all 3 cards, and even then, I'm pretty sure he didn't have enough to cover the tip. The waiter's polite mask was slipping, and I could see the judgment in his eyes as he processed the peasant math happening right in front of him. I have never felt more betrayed by a person's lack of character than I did by Julian in that moment. We walked out of that restaurant with our heads down, a complete reversal of the grand entrance we had made 2 hours prior. Julian didn't just cut me off, he purposefully orchestrated a scene to brand me as some sort of common thief in front of my peers. It is absolutely disgusting how money can reveal the inherent pettiness of a man's soul. He knew exactly where I was going and what I was doing, yet he chose the most public way possible to exert his control. It wasn't about the money for him, because $1,500 is pocket change to Julian. It was about the humiliation. He wanted to strip me of my dignity just because I chose to follow my heart. The ride back to Silas's apartment in a cramped, smelly Uber was the final insult of the night. I spent the entire journey explaining to Silas that this was just a temporary glitch, a sign of Julian's growing instability. I refused to let Julian's lack of class ruin the spiritual bond Silas and I were building. However, the reality of the situation was starting to sink in as I realized my phone wasn't picking up a signal either. Julian had clearly gone on a rampage, cutting every tie and every lifeline I had used to maintain my standard of living. It's truly pathetic when a man can't handle a breakup without resorting to financial warfare. Main story comments. Anonymous user 1 says, "Wait, let me get this straight. You dumped the guy for your ex, tell him he should keep paying your allowance as a severance package, and then you're shocked when he cancels the card? This isn't a breakup. It's a failed contract negotiation. You're lucky he didn't call the cops at the restaurant." Ops reply, "It was a contract, essentially. I provided social status and aesthetic value to his dreary corporate life for years. That has a market price, and any gentleman would understand that a transition period is standard for high-value partnerships." Anonymous user 2 says, "I'm dying at the image of the artist's soul Silas trying to pay a $1,000 plus bill with 3 half-maxed debit cards. Did the spiritual connection cover the 20% tip, or did you just leave the waiter a poem and some good vibes?" Apps reply, "Silas is a king who shouldn't have to concern himself with such pedestrian concerns as peasant math or tips. The fact that he even had to pull out a wallet is Julian's fault for being a vindictive child." Update 1. It's been 3 days since my last update, and the situation has devolved into a full-scale coordinated attack on my well-being. This morning, I walked into my boutique Pilates studio, ready to sweat out the toxins of Julian's betrayal, only to be told that my membership had been revoked. Apparently, the corporate account Julian used for our wellness expenses had been purged of my name specifically. The receptionist, a girl whose name I never bothered to learn but who always used to compliment my leggings, looked at me with such blatant condescension. I had to leave before I lost my composure as the realization hit that Julian was systematically erasing my existence from the city's elite spaces. Later that afternoon, my phone line was disconnected right in the middle of an essential call with a luxury realtor. I was trying to find a temporary loft for Silas and me somewhere, with high ceilings and a better vibe than his current dungeon when the line just went dead. I checked the settings, thinking it was a glitch, but the provider confirmed the primary account holder had terminated the service. Julian was part of a corporate plan that I'd been on for years, and he didn't even have the decency to give me 24 hours to port my number. This isn't just about money anymore. It's a calculated attempt to isolate me and cut off my professional and social contacts. The atmosphere at Silas's apartment is also starting to sour, mostly because he has no concept of what it takes to maintain a proper home. He started complaining about the vibe of the place because I haven't been able to afford the daily cleaning service I used to have at the penthouse. There are dishes in the sink and dust on the baseboards, things I haven't had to think about since I left my parents' house. Silas actually had the audacity to ask me if I knew how to use the vacuum cleaner yesterday. I looked at him like he had grown a second head. I am a muse, not a housemaid, and my hands were not made for manual labor. I realized that if Julian wanted to play this dirty, I had to be proactive and secure what I consider my back pay. I'm not a greedy person, but I am a fair one, and I know I earned a portion of the success he's enjoyed over the last 3 years. I remembered that I still had the login credentials for his secondary investment portal saved on my laptop. It's an account he rarely checks, usually reserved for his annual bonuses and fun money investments. Since I helped him earn those bonuses by being the perfect hostess and sounding board, I decided to transfer a reasonable amount to my personal account. It's not stealing if it's compensation for services rendered during the relationship. The process was surprisingly simple, and for a moment I felt a sense of relief wash over me as I saw the transaction pending screen. I only took what I felt was necessary to maintain my lifestyle for a few months while I sorted out my next move. It was a drop in the bucket for Julian, but for me, it was the difference between living in a dump and maintaining my dignity. I felt like I was finally taking control of the narrative that Julian was trying to destroy. I even started looking at designer furniture online again, feeling like my old self for the first time in days. Silas seemed happy too. Mostly because I bought him some high-end oil paints with the advance. However, the new Silas is starting to show some very unattractive traits now that the luxury buffer is thinning. He spends all day talking about authenticity but seems perfectly fine with me paying for his supplies with the money I recovered. He doesn't seem to understand the stress I'm under or the level of risk I'm taking to keep us afloat. Every time I try to talk about our future or our brand as a couple, he gets this glazed look in his eyes and starts talking about the struggle. I didn't sign up for a struggle. I signed up for a life of artistic passion supported by a foundation of comfort. He's becoming increasingly pedestrian in his complaints. By the second day after the transfer, I noticed that the money hadn't actually hit my bank account, which was concerning. I logged back into the portal, but my access had been denied, another incorrect password message that I knew was a lie. Julian must have seen the notification and blocked the transfer before it could clear. My heart sank as I realized he was monitoring his accounts more closely than I had anticipated. He's so obsessed with his hoarded wealth that he won't even let me have a tiny fraction of what I'm owed. It's a level of greed that I find truly repulsive in a man of his background. To make matters worse, I received a notification that my car lease, a beautiful silver SUV that was in Julian's company name, was being repossessed. I was supposed to meet a friend for brunch at a very exclusive spot, and I had to cancel because I literally didn't have a way to get there that didn't involve a bus. I haven't been on a bus since I was in college, and the thought of it made me feel physically ill. Julian is trying to strip away every layer of my identity, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but the inferior version of me. He thinks I am. He wants to see me crawl back to him, but I would rather die than give him that satisfaction. Silas didn't even offer to help me deal with the car situation. He just said that material possessions are anchors that weigh down the soul. It's easy to say that when you've never owned anything worth more than a used bike, but for me, it's about my standing in the world. I feel like I'm trapped in a bad movie where everyone is conspiring to make me look like the villain. I'm just a woman who wanted love and a fair settlement for her time. Why is that so hard for people to understand? I'm the victim here, being persecuted by a man with a god complex and a bottomless bank account. I spent the rest of the evening crying into a glass of very cheap wine that Silas bought at a convenience store. The taste was metallic and sharp, a constant reminder of how far I've fallen in such a short amount of time. I kept checking my email, hoping for a message from Julian, not an apology. I know he's too proud for that, but maybe a peace offering. Instead, all I got were service canceled notifications and a cold realization that the world I knew was disappearing. I'm being treated like a commoner, and it is the most insulting experience of my life. I have to find a way to make him pay for this disrespect. Update 1 comments. Anonymous user 1 says, recovered. Some money? Services rendered? Honey, that's called embezzlement or unauthorized access to a computer system. You're literally admitting to a felony on a public forum because you think you're too aesthetic to work a job. Julian isn't playing dirty. He's protecting his assets from a loon. OP's reply, it is a private marital matter, even if we weren't legally married. In high society circles, these things are settled with handshakes and checks, not legal threats. I was merely taking my fair share of the lifestyle equity I built. Anonymous User 2 says the image of you staring at a vacuum cleaner like it's an alien artifact is pure gold. Welcome to reality, where floors don't clean themselves, and your muse status doesn't pay the light bill. Does Silas know he's dating a wanted woman yet? Ops reply, manual labor is for people without vision or higher purpose. I shouldn't have to understand the mechanics of a Dyson to be a valuable member of society. My contribution is beauty and culture, which you clearly wouldn't understand. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since my last update, and the legal system has officially joined Julian's side in this crusade against me. I tried to reclaim my funds one more time using a different sub-account, but Julian had already flagged every single one of them with his security team. Instead of the money appearing in my account, I received a thick, terrifying envelope delivered by a courier who looked at me like I was a common criminal. It was a cease and desist letter from Julian's high-priced attorneys, full of words like unauthorized access and criminal prosecution. They are actually threatening to send me to jail for trying to access what is rightfully mine. Silas is becoming increasingly useless and, quite frankly, a bit of a burden on my mental health. He spends all day composing or sketching on the tiny balcony of this apartment while I am literally fielding calls from debt collectors for my car lease. He acts like the financial collapse of our life is some sort of artistic period. We're going through a blue phase of poverty. He doesn't seem to realize that I have standards that don't involve eating ramen noodles and using public transportation. The man has no drive, no ambition, and no respect for the fact that I am the one suffering the most in this transition. I decided that since Julian was hiding behind his lawyers, I would go to the one person he actually fears, his mother, Evelyn. I've always been Evelyn's favorite because I knew exactly how to elevate her son's image in the eyes of her social circle. She values pedigree and appearances above all else, and I knew she would be horrified to learn that her son was leaving me destitute. I called her, putting on my most fragile wounded bird voice, and told her that Julian was being unusually cruel. I hinted that his behavior was reflecting very poorly on the family name and that people were starting to talk about his instability. When she didn't immediately offer to write me a check, I had to pivot to a more direct strategy. I suggested that if I couldn't maintain my current lifestyle, I might be forced to sell my story to a certain high-end lifestyle blog. I told her I had hundreds of details about their private family scandals, things I'd overheard at dinners and holiday parties over the years. I thought the threat of social embarrassment in front of her peers would be enough to force Julian to open his checkbook. After all, the family's reputation is worth much more than the severance I was asking for. It was a simple business proposition. Evelyn was silent for a long time on the phone, which I interpreted as her processing the weight of my words. I felt a surge of triumph, thinking I had finally found the leverage I needed to end this nightmare. I told her I just wanted what was fair, a modest monthly stipend and the return of my vehicle. I reminded her that I was still the same girl she had praised for her impeccable taste just a few months ago. I was sure that by the next morning Julian would be calling me to apologize and settle this like a gentleman. I went to bed feeling like I had finally won the game. The next few days were spent in a state of hopeful anticipation, but that hope quickly turned into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. Julian didn't call, and Evelyn didn't send a messenger with a check. Instead, Silas started getting annoyed with me because I was obsessed with the past and trapped in a materialistic mindset. He actually told me that I should try to find a job to help with the rent, which is the most insulting thing anyone has ever said to me. I told him that my job is to be an inspiration, and if he can't see the value in that, then maybe he isn't the deep artist I thought he was. I started to notice that Silas was spending more and more time away from the apartment, claiming he was seeking inspiration in the city. I knew he was just avoiding the tension and the reality of our dwindling bank accounts. He's a coward who can't handle the pressure of real-life consequences, hiding behind his art like it's a shield. I'm the one who sacrificed everything for this relationship, and now I'm the one being punished for it. So incredibly unfair that I'm the only one taking the hits while Julian sits in his penthouse and Silas hides in his sketches. I feel completely abandoned by the men who claimed to love me. The debt collectors are now calling Silas's phone too because I had to use his number for some applications when mine was cut off. He's furious about it, acting like I've tainted his peaceful environment with my transactional problems. I reminded him that these transactional problems are the reason he's currently drinking expensive gin instead of the swill he used to buy. He doesn't seem to appreciate the level of effort I'm putting in to keep our heads above water. Everything I do is for us, but he treats me like I'm some sort of social pariah that he's doing a favor by housing. I've started selling some of my designer handbags on resale sites just to pay for basic necessities, and it feels like I'm selling pieces of my soul. Every time I pack a Birkin or a Chanel into a cardboard box, I feel a little bit more of my identity slipping away. These aren't just bags, they're milestones of my success and my status. Seeing them go to some new money girl who probably won't even store them correctly is heartbreaking. Julian is the one who forced me into this position, and I will never, ever forgive him for making me liquidate my life's work. I'm currently sitting in this cramped apartment, listening to the neighbor's TV through the thin walls, and I can't help but wonder how things went so wrong. I chose true love, and all I got was a legal threat and a boyfriend who wants me to use a vacuum cleaner. It feels like the entire world is stacked against women who have the courage to be their authentic selves. I'm not going to give up though. I have one more card to play and it's going to be the biggest one yet. Julian thinks he's won, but he doesn't realize how dangerous a woman with nothing left to lose can be. Update 2 comments. Anonymous user 1 says you tried to blackmail his mother? With scandals you heard while he was paying for your life, you are literally a textbook example of why people sign DAs. I bet Julian is thanking his lucky stars. He got away when he did. OP's reply: it wasn't blackmail. It was a negotiation regarding brand protection. The family name has a value, and I was simply offering to keep that value intact in exchange for the support I was promised. It's standard PR logic. Anonymous user 2 says, selling pieces of your soul. You mean selling bags that Julian bought you? Also, Muse isn't a job title that pays the rent in 2026. Maybe try being a waitress or a receptionist, like the inferiors you look down on. Ops reply: I would rather starve than engage in the soul-crushing drudgery of service work. I have a certain frequency I need to maintain, and peasant labor would destroy my creative energy. You clearly have no understanding of high-level lifestyle maintenance. Update 3. It's been a month since my last update, and my leverage against Julian's family has exploded in my face like a cheap knockoff perfume. I was waiting for Evelyn to cave to my proposal, but instead of a settlement, I received a phone call from Julian's primary attorney. He informed me in a tone that was dripping with professional malice that the scandals I threatened to reveal were covered by a non-disclosure agreement. I signed it 2 years ago in exchange for a vintage Van Cleef & Arpels jewelry set, a set I had already pawned to pay for Silas's creative retreat last month. I had completely forgotten about the paperwork because, honestly, who actually reads those things when there are diamonds involved? But the real boomerang wasn't the legal threat. It was Evelyn's personal retaliation, which was far more devastating than anything a lawyer could do. She didn't just ignore me, she sent a mass email to our entire social circle, the yacht club, the charity boards, even the organizers of the Met Gala. In the email, she stated that I was suffering a severe mental breakdown and was attempting to extort her family. She even attached a copy of the incident report from L'Hermitage where my card was declined. Within hours, I was socially radioactive, a pariah in the only world that has ever mattered to me. The fallout was immediate and absolute, stripping away the last remains of my dignity. I tried to walk into a gallery opening last night, an event I've attended every year for the last 5, and the doorman stopped me at the velvet rope. This was a man I used to tip $50 just to acknowledge my presence, and he looked at me with a mixture of boredom and disdain. He told me the event was at capacity, and that my name was no longer on the VIP list. I stood there in the street, surrounded by people I used to call friends, and not one of them would even meet my eyes. It was like I had become invisible, or worse, a cautionary tale. To make matters even more unbearable, Silas wasn't even there to support me through this public execution. He told me he had a meeting with some other artists, but I later found out he was at a dive bar with real people. He had the nerve to tell me that my life was too transactional, and that he couldn't handle the drama of my social collapse anymore. He said he needed to be around people who understand the struggle without complaining about the price of the wine. The man I sacrificed my entire future for is now treating me like I'm the one who's being unreasonable and difficult. I went back to the apartment alone, feeling a sense of isolation that was almost physical. Every bridge I've ever built has been burned, mostly by Julian's vindictive nature and Evelyn's cold-blooded social maneuvering. They didn't just want to break up with me, they wanted to erase me from existence. It's a level of cruelty that I didn't think people of our class were capable of. I spent the night looking through old photos of myself at galas and parties, wondering how that woman could end up sitting in a room that smells like stale cigarette smoke and desperation. The next morning, Silas came home and told me he was moving out. He didn't even have the courage to look at me when he said it. Just kept packing his dirty laundry and his half-finished canvases into trash bags. He said that my obsession with status was stifling his creativity and that he couldn't be a trophy for a girl who didn't even have a mantle to sit on anymore. I laughed a bitter, hysterical sound and told him that I was the one who provided everything for him. He just shrugged and said that energy is the only currency that matters. And apparently, mine was bankrupt. I watched him leave from the window, carrying his life in plastic bags, and I felt a strange sense of emptiness. I had thrown away a billionaire for a man who didn't even have the loyalty of a stray dog. Julian was right about one thing: Silas is a bottom feeder who only cares about himself. But that doesn't make Julian any less of a monster for what he's done to me. He used his power to crush me because I dared to have a heart, and now I'm left with nothing but a pawn ticket for a necklace I don't even own anymore. It's a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions, and I'm the only one who sees the injustice of it. I tried to call a few friends to see if I could crash on a couch for a few days, but no one picked up. I've been blocked, unfollowed, and erased from the digital and physical landscapes of the city. I'm currently living on the last few $100s I got from selling my favorite pair of Louboutins. It's a humiliating existence, a constant reminder of how fickle the world can be when you lose your financial backing. I'm still convinced that this is all a huge misunderstanding and that eventually someone will realize how poorly I've been treated. The silence in the apartment is deafening now that Silas is gone. I find myself walking into the kitchen to make coffee and then realizing I don't even know how to use the machine he left behind. Everything about my life feels like a foreign language that I'm forced to learn under duress. I spend most of my time staring at my phone, waiting for a notification that never comes. I am a queen without a kingdom, a muse without an artist, and a woman without a credit limit. It's a terrifying place to be, and I don't know how much longer I can maintain the facade. I've started looking at the help wanted section of the internet, but nothing seems appropriate for someone of my stature. Everything requires experience and things I've spent my life avoiding, like spreadsheets or customer service. The idea of serving people who used to envy me is a nightmare I can't wake up from. I'm being forced into a life of pedestrian reality, and it feels like a death sentence. Julian and his mother have won this round, but they haven't broken my spirit. I am still Madeline, and I will find a way to get back what is mine, even if I have to claw my way through the mud to do it. Update 3 comments. Anonymous user 1 says so. Let's recap: you pawned a jewelry set. You didn't legally own to fund a retreat for a guy who just dumped you, and now you're banned from every club in town. This isn't a tragedy, it's a dark comedy. Evelyn is a legend for that mass email. Ops reply: Evelyn is a petty, aging socialite who is terrified of the truth. The jewelry was a gift, and in my world, a gift is a transfer of ownership regardless of what some fine print says. I am the victim of a coordinated character assassination. Anonymous user 2 says, energy is the only currency that matters. Even the artist's soul thinks you're too much work. When the guy who lives in a dungeon tells you you're bankrupt, it's time to look in the mirror. Are you going to apply for that waitressing job now, or are you still waiting for a spiritual check? Ops replies: Silas was a fleeting obsession that I've already outgrown. His inability to handle high-stakes social dynamics just proves he wasn't worthy of my energy in the first place. I will never stoop to the level of service work. I am a strategist. Update 4. It's been 6 months since my last update, and the world looks very different from the seat of a city bus. I'm writing this from a studio apartment that smells like old carpet, lemon-scented cleaning products, and total desperation. Silas left me for good 4 months ago, and I heard through the grapevine that he's already moved in with a girl who understands the struggle. In reality, that's just code for a girl who has a steady waitressing job and pays his rent while he plays with paint. He didn't want a muse. He wanted a patron, and I was the only one foolish enough to try and provide that while my own life was sinking. I lost my car, my friends, and my dignity in the span of a single season. I had to take a job as a personal shopper, but not for the high-end boutiques I used to frequent. I'm working for a mid-tier department store, picking out clothes for the kind of new money women I used to mock over. Lunch at the country club. I spend my days helping women with no taste select outfits that will make them look like they belong in the world I was kicked out of. The irony is that I am the expert, the one with the pedigree, yet I have to smile and nod as they suggest the most garish combinations. I am essentially a servant to the very people I used to look down upon, and every day is a fresh exercise in humiliation. Last week I was at a charity gala not as a guest but as an assistant to one of my most demanding clients. I was there to hold her spare shoes and make sure her hair stayed in place while she networked with the city's elite. I saw Julian across the room looking better than I've ever seen him. He was surrounded by people, laughing and looking completely at ease, as if the 3 years we spent together were just a footnote in his very successful life. He looked right through me when I walked past him. It wasn't even out of anger or resentment. It was a look of total, absolute indifference. To him, I wasn't even a memory. I was just part of the background noise of the event. That indifference hurt more than any legal threat or social banishment ever could. It made me realize that to Julian, my worth was entirely tied to his credit limit. And once that was gone, I ceased to exist. I still think he's a complete monster for not supporting me through the transition, though. A real gentleman, a man of true character, would have ensured that the woman who gave him his best years never had to see the inside of a public transport vehicle. He had the power to make my life easy, but he chose to let me drown just because I chose true love over his cold, transactional world. It's a level of selfishness that I find truly incomprehensible. I spent the rest of the gala in the ladies' room crying so I wouldn't ruin my client's evening. I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. The designer clothes are gone, replaced by professional attire from the store I work for. My skin doesn't have that expensive glow anymore because I can't afford the monthly facials or the $500 creams. I'm becoming one of the pedestrians I used to pity, and the transition is agonizing. I still feel like I'm in a dream, waiting for someone to wake me up and tell me that my platinum card has been restored. I saw Silas's new girlfriend in a photo on social media yesterday, and she's exactly what I expected. She wears fast fashion clothes and has a look of authentic happiness that I find incredibly grating. Silas looks happy too, probably because he doesn't have to hear about my materialistic needs anymore. They deserve each other, two mediocre people living a mediocre life in a mediocre apartment. I was the only thing that ever gave Silas a touch of class, and now he's back where he belongs in the mud with the rest of the real people. I don't miss him. I miss the woman I was when I was with Julian. Julian has a new girlfriend too. A girl who is 10 years younger than me and has the social standing of a minor royal. I saw her in the society pages looking perfectly aesthetic and framed by Julian's wealth. It's the same role I played, but she's being rewarded for it while I'm being punished. It just goes to show that there is no justice in this world for women who try to follow their hearts. If I had been more calculated, I could have stayed with Julian and had Silas on the side, but I was too honest for my own good. My integrity is what destroyed me, and that is the most bitter pill to swallow. I still have a few pieces of jewelry that I couldn't bring myself to pawn, little reminders of the life I lost. I take them out sometimes and just hold them, trying to remember what it felt like to be important. Now, my importance is measured by how quickly I can find a size 6 dress for a woman who has too much money and not enough sense. I'm a ghost haunting my own life, watching other people live the dream that I built. I hate every single person who played a part in my downfall, but mostly, I hate the fact that I'm the only one who had to pay the price. Sometimes I think about calling Julian just to tell him how much he's ruined my life, but I know he wouldn't even take the call. His lawyers would probably send me another letter before I could even get past the receptionist. He's built a wall around himself that I can no longer scale. I'm on the outside looking in and the view is absolutely miserable. I've learned that true love is a luxury that people like me can't afford unless someone else is picking up the tab. It was a beautiful idea, but the execution was a disaster because the men in my life were too small to handle a woman of my magnitude. I'm going to keep working at the store for now because I have no other choice. I have to pay for this studio apartment and the cheap wine that has become my only comfort. I'm waiting for my next big break, for some wealthy man to walk in and see the value that Julian was too blind to keep. I know I still have that spark, that it factor that can't be bought or sold. Until then, I'll keep curating other people's lives while mine remains a cluttered, disorganized mess. It's so incredibly unfair, but I suppose that's the price you pay for being a masterpiece in a world of sketches.